There is a subtle yet absolute law in all relationships. Energy always flows toward what is lacking. When an empath has not yet healed, they are like a river, without banks, always flowing toward others, always trying to fill a void they themselves have never dared to face. And the narcissist, guided by the instincts of shadow, can smell that void the way a predator smells blood. They come not to love, but to consume. Before awakening, the empath loves as if begging to be seen. They give without limits, believing that love deep enough can transform someone. They believe gentleness can redeem a storm, that if they are kind enough, the other person will finally learn how to love. But their love is not returned, it is absorbed, drained, manipulated, and they collapse, thinking they have failed. In truth, that collapse is only the beginning of an ancient rite, a rite the soul must pass through to distinguish real empathy from unconscious self-erasure. When the empath begins to stop saving others, and instead turns inward to heal themselves, something extraordinary happens. The energy the narcissist once fed on their attention, compassion, fear, reactions, begins to withdraw back to the center. The empath no longer seeks to be loved. They begin to become love. They stop reacting, stop proving, stop asking for permission to be understood. They choose silence. And in that silence, an invisible reversal takes place. The energy that was once pulled outward now returns to its source. The narcissist's ego feels the void, the absence of the supply that once sustained them. They panic, they rage, and then they circle back. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the power they once had when you were not yet sovereign. They mistake your light for their lifeline. But now, that light belongs to its rightful owner, and they can no longer touch it. That is when the game ends. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through the law of energy. The one who controls themselves controls the entire field. When the empath heals, they do not simply escape the narcissist. They force the narcissist to confront their own darkness. This is not a story about love, but a story about the reversal of energy, the cost of manipulation, and the silent power of awakening. Because when an empath truly heals, they no longer chase anyone, the universe begins to chase them. Part 1. The empath and the illness of needing to be loved. There is no pain deeper than the feeling that you must be loved by others in order to believe you deserve to exist. This is the invisible illness. Most empaths carry the illness of a soul raised in an environment where love was a reward, not a natural right. From childhood, they learned to sense other people's moods before they were ever allowed to express their own. They became children who listened closely for shifts in tone, who watched every glance to guess whether they would be loved or rejected that day. And slowly they lost the boundary between who I am and who others need me to be. As adults, they carry that pattern into relationships. They feel drawn to cold, wounded, or emotionally closed-off people because on a subconscious level they are seeing the unhealed parts of themselves. They mistake intensity for destiny, chaos for love, and believe that if they are kind enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, the other person will eventually love them back. But the truth is, in those relationships, they are not truly loving the other person. They are trying to love the abandoned child within themselves. According to Jung, this is projection. We see in another the part of ourselves we cannot face. The empath projects the image of the imperfect, distant parent onto the narcissist and unconsciously believes that if they can get this person to change, they can rewrite history. But love cannot heal a wound born from fear. It can only recreate that wound in a new form. Only when the empath reaches the bottom of exhaustion, when they no longer have the energy to keep saving others, does awakening truly begin. They stop asking, "Why did they hurt me?" and start asking, "Why did I allow this to continue?" They realize the problem was never the narcissist, but their own belief that they must be chosen in order to feel enough. Jung calls this stage nigredo, the blackening of the soul, where all illusions collapse, leaving only one naked truth. No one can love me in the right way if I am still refusing to love myself. From the moment they stop running, the energy begins to reverse. They no longer leak emotions through explanations. They no longer seek validation in someone else's eyes. Instead, they turn inward, learning to sit with fear, with loneliness, with their truest self. And in the deepest silence, they discover that love never needed to be begged, for it is the natural state of the soul when it is no longer ruled by fear. When the empath heals the illness of needing to be loved, they no longer love from emptiness, they love as an act of creation. They can give without losing themselves, sit in silence without feeling abandoned, and walk away without guilt. Their love becomes sovereign light, no longer a resource for others to exploit. And that is when the narcissist begins to panic, because the very power that once fed them, the empath's need to be needed, is gone. The empath is no longer a river with no banks. They become an ocean, ordered, deep, still, and impossible to control. Parched time, the reversal of energy from lacking to enough. When the empath heals the illness of needing to be loved, an invisible shift occurs, quiet but absolute. Before, they were an open door, absorbing the emotions of others as if it were their sacred duty. They believed unlimited kindness was proof of love, that endurance was a sign of depth. But in truth, they were living in reaction, not awareness. They were not choosing love, they were compelled to love in order to fill the void created by the fear of abandonment. And that very void acted like a magnetic field, attracting those who feed on emotional nourishment, narcissists, and others who do not yet know how to sustain themselves. Awakening begins the moment the empath stops broadcasting the signal, "I am lacking." Every time they stop reacting, every time they say no instead of accommodating, every time they choose silence instead of explaining, they retrieve a piece of their leaking energy. Like sealing the fractures of the soul, they begin to feel their true weight not through others' eyes, but through their own steady presence. Jung calls this process the withdrawal of libido, when life force energy stops flowing outward in search of love and returns inward to nourish consciousness. They no longer panic when someone withdraws. They no longer tremble when ignored. Their silence becomes a mirror in which the narcissist sees their own emptiness. And here is the irony. When the empath no longer needs, the narcissist begins to need. This is the subtle reversal that the universe executes flawlessly. When you chase, you give your power away. When you stop, the energy returns home. The empath once believed that love was limitless sacrifice. Now they understand that giving while losing oneself is not love. It is a transaction born from fear. They begin to feel their boundaries as something sacred, a circle of consciousness where everything they give carries intention rather than desperation. For the narcissist, this shift is an existential crisis. Their entire identity depends on controlling another's reactions. When the empath is silent, not crying, not explaining, not defending, the narcissist system loses its energy source. That is when they become most desperate. They try to reignite the old emotional charge. Messages, memories, guilt, victim playing, even pretending to change. But the empath has transformed. They no longer wobble because they understand a profound truth. Peace is not protected by words, but by awareness. This inner fullness also carries deep spiritual meaning. When the empath reaches this state of enough, they no longer need to prove, win, or resolve anything through conversation. They know their silence has already spoken. They understand the narcissist's true pain is not losing them, but losing control over them. And on a deeper level, they learn the greatest lesson. True love is not merging. It is staying yourself while keeping the heart open. They were not choosing love, they were compelled to love in order to fill the void created by the fear of abandonment. And that very void acted like a magnetic field, attracting those who feed on emotional nourishment, narcissists, and others who do not yet know how to sustain themselves. Awakening begins the moment the empath stops broadcasting the signal, "I am lacking." Every time they stop reacting, every time they say no instead of accommodating. Part 3. The narcissist's psychological collapse. When the empath heals and pulls all their energy out of the emotional game, the narcissist falls into a state of chaos they cannot explain. In their inner world, power and existence are tied to their ability to provoke a reaction. Every tear you shed, every attempt you make to prove yourself, every justification that leaves your lips is proof to them that they still hold control. But now, when you no longer react, when your energy is still, they no longer feel alive. Your silence is not an empty space to them, it is a sentence. This collapse unfolds in layers, like a system losing power in the dark. The first layer is denial. They tell themselves, she'll come back, he's just testing me. The narcissist always believes they hold the upper hand. They are used to living in the illusion that others exist only to orbit them. When the empath disappears from that energetic field, their mind cannot accept reality. Like an actor who has always performed for a full audience, suddenly having to act in an empty room, they begin to lose their sense of direction. After denial comes panic. They check their phone constantly, secretly stalk you online, ask about you through mutual friends, even manufacture accidental encounters. But that is not love, it is withdrawal. For the narcissist, other people's emotions are the strongest drug. Losing that supply, they go through withdrawal, like an actual addict. Restless, angry, sleepless, swinging between self-deprecation and grandiosity. Sometimes they immediately seek a new source, to fill the void another person to mirror them, to cling to continue the game. But no matter how many new people they find, the emptiness does not shrink. Because the energy they are addicted to does not lie in those people, it lies in the life force of the empath, something they cannot produce on their own. The next stage is the collapse of the ego image. When all their old tactics stop working, guilt-tripping, blame-shifting, crying, threatening, seducing, they are forced to face what they fear most, themselves. In the darkness of their inner world, the echoes they have avoided their whole life begin to resound the sound of emptiness, of self-disgust, of the shattering of the perfect image they once constructed. And because they have never learned how to sit with real feelings, this collapse feels like free-falling into nothingness. Many narcissists try to escape. They throw themselves into work, sex addiction, alcohol, religious fanaticism, or spiritual delusion. But nothing can cover the feeling of having lost control over the energy the empath once provided. According to Jung, this is the moment when the shadow begins to rise. When the empath stops holding their negative energy for them, all the repressed darkness of the narcissist surges into consciousness. They begin to experience exactly what they once inflicted, the feeling of being ignored, dismissed, seen through. The universe does not punish them. It simply restores energetic symmetry. Before, they lived off the reflected emotions of others. Now, all they are left with is their true image, empty, unbelieved, unheard. That is a psychological hell no insult could ever rival. Some narcissists, when confronted with this void, choose self-destruction. They ruin relationships, wreck their reputation, or sink into despair. Others begin to chase. They cannot bear having lost signal from you. They text, apologize, repent, even play the enlightened one. They talk about change, about karma, about soul connections. But all of it is a desperate attempt to reignite the old reaction to prove they still have influence. They do not want you, they want your reaction. For the awakened empath, this return no longer makes them tremble. They see clearly the motives beneath the apologies. They feel the lack in every message. They understand that love is not healing someone who refuses to heal themselves. And instead of falling back into the old loop, they choose silence. They let the narcissist face their own shadow, not out of hatred, but out of knowing that no one can awaken as long as someone else is still shielding them from the consequences of their actions. This is the real-world reversal of energy. The empath does not need revenge. Their peace is the highest form of judgment, and the narcissist, abandoned in the emptiness of their ego, will slowly realize what they have denied all their life. They were never truly strong. Their power only existed as long as others believed in it. When the empath stops believing, the entire fake kingdom collapses. And from those ashes, the universe begins its fairest work, forcing them to see the raw truth of who they are, where the empath's light once shone and now remains only as a distant memory they will never touch again. Part 4. When the narcissist begins to chase, the reversal of energy does not just make the narcissist collapse, it drives them mad with the loss of power. When they realize they can no longer control the empath's emotions, obsession begins. They no longer see you as a person, but as a severed energy source, something they must reclaim at all costs. That is when the chase begins. But paradoxically, the one being chased is no longer on the same energetic level. In this phase, the narcissist becomes desperately creative. They reenact old scripts with new costumes. Some choose to play the victim, sending messages about illness, loss, even talking about karma or spiritual awakening as a form of confession. Others use indirect tactics, mutual friends, social media, or accidental encounters to re-trigger your attention. Some take the opposite approach, flaunting success, happiness, or being desired by many just to stir your curiosity or sense of inadequacy. All their actions share one goal: to reignite your emotional response. But now, the empath is no longer shaken. Their calmness becomes a new language, one the narcissist cannot decode. The narcissist is used to intensity, to explanations and arguments. They live in drama, so they cannot understand someone who simply stands still and sees through everything. When you no longer react, you become a perfectly flat mirror, one in which they are forced to look at themselves. And what they see is no longer power, but emptiness. Psychologically, this is the stage of reverse reflection. Previously, the empath was the mirror reflecting the narcissist's emotions. Now, the narcissist is forced to mirror back the very fears they once ran from. The feeling of, I am abandoned, I am not enough, I am not seen, all rise up from the depths of their subconscious. They cling to you, not because they love you, but because you are the last witness to their illusion of self. When you step out, they do not just lose a person, they lose the version of themselves that was once reflected through you. So they begin to chase energy, not a human being. They feel inexplicably pulled toward you, even while their logic says, don't. They type messages and delete them, watch your stories and pretend it was accidental, even pray for you to come back. But in truth, they are trying to resurrect the old energetic field, the place where they used to feel valuable. Your silence unsettles them so deeply that they will do anything to make you react. Because with just one reaction, anger or pity, they can feel they still exist. Obson. For the healed empath, this is the final test. Not falling into the trap of misplaced compassion. Because pity is the doorway through which their energy can be pulled back out. Instead of returning to help or save, they simply remain in the observer's awareness. They understand that everything the narcissist displays is just an abandoned child in an adult's body, desperate for attention, yet terrified of truth. Instead of getting angry or sentimental, they look with the eyes of someone who has grown up. I see you, but I no longer belong to your game. Energetically, when the empath holds a stable frequency, the narcissist's field begins to collapse on its own. For darkness can only exist when there is light to reflect it. Without reflection, it dissolves back into its own nothingness. That is why, after some time without a reaction, the narcissist loses energetic connection, falls into depression, or rushes to find a new supply. But no matter how many new mirrors they find, they never forget you, not because of love, but because you are the only one they could not manipulate anymore. For the empath, this is not a victory in the egoic sense, but the completion of a karmic cycle. In the narcissist's desperate pursuit, they finally see the greatest lesson. No one truly wins. No one truly loses energy, simply returns to where it belongs. And when that happens, the empath no longer fears abandonment, because they understand the one who used to run from the dark must eventually become their own light, and the one who lived off borrowed light will forever be haunted by it. That is when the game truly ends, not through revenge, not through hatred, but through absolute awakening. Because when the empath is genuinely healed, they no longer need to prove anything. They simply walk away and their very footsteps become a bell that rings through the night, calling other souls who are still running in the dark to finally wake up. Part 5. The Empath After Healing. The Power of Peace. After everything, the empath does not become a tougher version of themselves, as many might assume, but a clearer one. They no longer fight the darkness, because they have understood this. What keeps darkness alive is not malice, but ignorance, and that understanding frees them from all the power games they were once trapped in. They no longer need to resist, nor to prove anything, because now they have realized one simple yet profound truth. Peace is the highest form of power. In the past, the empath tied their self-worth to other people's reactions. Now, they tie it to the depth of their inner stillness. They no longer seek love as a reward, but live as if they themselves are already love. The way they speak, walk, and show up in the world carries a different kind of energy, one that does not demand, does not cling, does not compete. It is the kind of energy that makes unhealed souls feel both drawn to it and afraid of it, because they cannot touch it and they cannot control it. The healed empath no longer needs to run from their emotions. They can feel sadness without falling into despair, see darkness without losing faith. They become an inner observer, witnessing every movement of the mind without being fused to it. This is the state Jung calls individuation, the process of the soul returning to its center, where ego and shadow are reconciled, where light and suffering are no longer enemies, but two poles of the same current of energy. At this point, they no longer need to defeat the narcissist, because they have risen above the idea of winning and losing. They no longer see the one who hurt them as an enemy, but as a karmic teacher, someone who unconsciously helped them see the split-off parts of themselves. Instead of hatred, they feel gratitude, not gratitude for the pain, but for the awakening the pain brought. They understand that without darkness, their light would have remained only a theory. It is also at this stage that their love changes in nature. It is no longer a thirst to be reciprocated, but a field of free energy. When they love someone, they no longer cling, no longer fear losing, no longer feel the need to hold on. They understand that every soul has its own path, and that true love does not need possession to feel complete. They love with respect, with freedom, with awareness, and it is precisely that lack of demand that makes their love more powerful than any declaration. Energetically, they are no longer a supply for anyone. They become their own source. The energy that once leaked outward now circulates within, moving like a self-sustaining current. Their magnetism no longer lies in appearance, voice, or gentleness, but in their frequency of awareness. Anyone who steps into their field feels something hard to name, both illuminated and exposed, because real light always makes the darkness in others tremble. And this is exactly why, at a deeper level, the narcissist begins to fear the very person they once controlled. Not because of anything you do, but because you no longer emit the frequency of fear or dependence, the two energies that feed their ego. Standing before you, they feel seen through. Every tactic, every promise, every performance of weakness becomes meaningless. They feel exposed, as if standing before a perfectly honest mirror where there is no room left for illusion. At this point, the empath does not need to pay back karma or get revenge. They simply live in truth, and truth by itself has more destructive power than any rage. Because while the narcissist is still struggling to maintain an image, the empath has returned to essence. While that person runs from the void, this one sits down, breathes, and finds God in that very emptiness. This is the highest form of freedom, freedom from the need to be understood, to be loved, to be chosen. And the paradox is, precisely when they no longer need, everything begins to come to them. They attract kindred souls, people who are also living in the frequency of peace. No one tries to change anyone. No one plays the savior or the victim. There is only presence, listening, and a love without tragedy. The healed empath does not become a saint, but becomes real, able to feel anger, sadness, and tenderness, yet not ruled by any of it. And it is exactly this balance that makes them quietly radiant. They no longer need to shine in order to be seen, because they have become the light. And for the narcissist, nothing is more frightening than someone they cannot touch, cannot stir, cannot shake. Because true light does not need to prove itself, it simply exists, and everything falls away on its own. Part 6. When peace becomes the new karma. After moving through the phase of pursuit and entering a state of complete stillness, the empath realizes something profound. Peace is not just a reward, but a spiritual responsibility. Because once they have dissolved fear, they become a mirror in which other souls can see the unhealed darkness within themselves. Their peace is no longer avoidance of conflict, but an ordered energy, the kind that forces chaos to reveal its true nature. And when this happens, the universe begins to move around them with a different rhythm. All old relationships and connections that were built on fear, power, or dependence gradually fall away. There is no dramatic breakup, no argument, they simply dissolve, like frequencies that are no longer in sync. This is not loss, but the natural purification of energy. At this point, the empath does not run from the past. They simply no longer belong to it. Those who once caused them pain begin to fade from their field of awareness, as if the universe is clearing the path for a new phase, the phase of resonance instead of rescue. When the empath lives in the frequency of enoughness, they begin to attract different kinds of souls, not people who need to be fixed, but people who are also awakening. These connections feel completely different from what they once knew. No more drama, no more control, no more tests of patience. Everything unfolds so gently that at first it feels strange, because after years of chaotic love, peace can look like a lack of feeling. But gradually they realize this is what real love is. Love not as a storm, but as the sky after the storm. Not as thunder, but as the warm breath of presence. Spiritually, this is the moment the empath enters the soul's rebirth cycle. They have passed through the lower layers of karma, where love is a game of lack, where kindness is mistaken for weakness, and now function at a higher level, where love is a reflection of consciousness. When they love, they no longer lose energy, because their love does not come from an ego that wants to control, but from a soul that wants to share. Every word they speak, every glance, every gesture becomes a vehicle that transmits conscious energy. Because of this, they begin to impact the world in a different way. Not loudly, not by persuading, not by trying to teach, but simply through their presence. They make those around them begin to turn inward and examine themselves. Their energy no longer moves in a restless way. It radiates quietly. They walk into a room and the atmosphere naturally softens. They speak less, but their words carry the weight of someone who has walked through both darkness and light. They no longer perform goodness. They let it emanate like the scent of a flower that doesn't need to try to bloom. For the narcissist, this presence becomes a kind of reflective karma, because the empath no longer hates them, no longer wishes them harm, but simply sees them as an unripe aspect of humanity. And it is precisely this non-judging gaze that makes the narcissist feel more exposed than ever. No longer being hated, they are also no longer special in someone's anger. They fall into a space where no one fights them, no one reacts, no one fears them. In that emptiness, they are forced to hear the echo of their own voice. It is the gentlest yet deepest form of punishment the universe can offer. As for the empath, they no longer seek joy in finally getting justice. Their joy now comes from seeing order return to the world. They understand that everyone is at a different stage of awakening. They no longer need to save anyone, but they also do not close their heart. They simply live in a state of witnessing, where loving and letting go are no longer in conflict. This is when they truly become an anonymous healer, not through techniques, not through teachings, but through energy. Their peace spreads like underground water, quiet, yet strong enough to soften the hardened soil where darkness once settled. And the world, even without knowing it, begins to change because of their presence. The empath no longer says, "I forgive you." They simply live in a state where there is nothing left to forgive. Because they understand that everything that happened was just roles in a larger play where both souls are learning to remember who they are. And when they understand this, they no longer need to be acknowledged, repaid, or loved back. They only need to be present in their true nature, true frequency, true light. That is the final sign of healing. When peace is no longer a fleeting emotion, but becomes a new karmic force, the very thing the universe uses to rewrite the entire trajectory of the soul. And from that moment on, the empath no longer searches for love, because they have become love in human form.